Before we begin the program tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that wherever you are zooming in from, you are on Indigenous land. Here at Mohi, and also where I'm actually at the U District, I'm on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and all Coast Salish people. We want to acknowledge the forced displacement of Native people from this land while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here. To this day, the Duwamish people have yet to receive federal recognition. And we encourage you to learn more about their fight for federal recognition by visiting the Duwamish Longhouse in West Seattle when it's safe to do so, and also their website, which we'll put in the chat. If you are calling in from somewhere not Seattle and want to learn more about Indigenous communities near you, we recommend going to nativeland.ca to learn more. Also, today is the year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd by the police. And that marked the beginning of an uprising last summer. And this is not something that has ended. These protests against the police violence towards Black people continue. And as we see the patterns of violence cycle and repeat and the ongoing calls to action, it's important here at Mohi for us to state unequivocally that Black lives matter and that we stand unfalteringly with those who are calling for justice now. And tonight we're going to be talking a lot about calls for justice and about race and the ways that we have been differently impacted by this pandemic due to things like race and class and the many different ways that injustice has been enacted and ways that we can strive towards justice. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Connor to tell us more about the labor archives and who is speaking tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. For visual description, I am a white male presenting person with a beard and glasses and books. And I swear that it's not just because I'm a librarian that there are books behind me, but that just happens to be a happy coincidence. And as my surname would suggest, Casey, my white skin is slightly red because that's part of the Irish experience. I want to thank all of my Mohi fellow workers for having me here tonight. And thank you all for joining us here tonight. As Rachel noted, I'm head of the Labor Archives of Washington, which is part of the University of Washington Library Special Collections. When Rachel and Nicole first approached me about collaborating on another event, we had a previous event last summer that got canceled due to the pandemic. We had a series of very lively and far-ranging conversations about this particular historic moment and its implications for the world of work. I've got to say that I truly enjoyed brainstorming and having generative conversations with both of these brilliant humans, and we came up with a lot of ideas. But one thing that never wavered during that planning was our goal: make this event a platform for workers and the labor movement leaders to talk about their experiences of the pandemic. I hope you will find that we have succeeded in that tonight as we hear our panelists in conversation featuring the experiences of frontline workers, labor advocates, and historical researchers, although that person was not able to join us, as we reconsider what role the work plays in our lives. The model for this event has much in common with the Labor Archives' 6th annual event in December of 2020, Essential Voices of Frontline Workers, the Struggle for Rights and Survival During COVID-19. If you missed the event or would like to hear the compelling speakers again, you can still view the recording on the Seattle Channel website, and I believe we have a link that will be put in chat. The Labor Archives itself is a community archives located at the University of Washington Library's Special Collections in Seattle. We were founded in 2010 as a collaboration between the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies and the Library's Special Collections, and we still work closely with the labor movement. Over the past year and a half, we have been doing oral history interviews with the workers impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic for our Working in the Time of COVID-19 Oral History project. To do this, we partnered with labor organizations, community groups, faculty, and students. This pilot phase of a larger project so far has interviewed a couple dozen workers, and we expect a couple dozen more in the near term. The interviews themselves were accomplished via Zoom and are available online at the Internet Archives. And we have a link for that too. You can access the existing interviews via the Internet Archives by that link. Just know that we're still processing a lot of them, so those aren't the only ones. There's a whole wave that's going to be coming in soon. In this project, we really sought to include a diverse range of experiences in terms of occupation, race, gender, geographic region, and age. We partnered with labor community organizations to develop interview questions and to identify interview candidates. Those partners included the Asian Pacific Labor Alliance, the Amalgamated Transit Workers, Local 587, which are the transit drivers and operators and people who maintain it, Healthcare 1199 Northwest, SEIU, Unite Here Local 8, and United Food and Commercial Workers Local 21. We also partnered with the faculty member to students doing interviews with musical workers and an undergraduate student project with an emphasis on interviewing workers in the hospitality and healthcare industry. Those interviews will have a lot of women workers and workers of color, which is important, particularly those are groups, as we shall see, who are disproportionately impacted by the negative effects of the pandemic. I'd invite you to check all these event recordings and hear the panels of workers talking about their experiences and to listen to the interviews online. You are also invited to a similar panel on June 26th that's part of the Pacific Northwest Labor History Association conference. It'll be online and it'll be another platform to hear worker voices about working in the time of COVID. I'd like to thank our moderator, Adair Dammann, and speakers April Sims and Carmen Figueroa, who have so kindly agreed to join us and their knowledge and experiences today. With that, I will introduce Adair Dammann, our panel moderator for tonight and director of the Washington State Labor Education and Research Center at South Seattle College. Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. As Connor said, I'm Adair Dammann. I'm the director of the Washington State Labor Education and Research Center. I am a white woman with blue glasses on, long hair. It used to be short pre-pandemic, middle-aged. I'm wearing a green shirt, and behind me is a foggy day in the Olympics in my background picture. I am joined tonight by two colleagues. I think that I'll just set the stage a little bit, but I invite April and Carmen to join us. Turn your camera on, turn your mute off so we can say hi. 2020 was a year like none I've experienced in my life. Probably none that we've experienced in this generation. I've spent my entire life being a student of work and workers. I've been a worker, I've been an organizer of workers, I've been an advocate for workers. This year, we found ourselves simultaneously navigating a public health crisis, an economic disaster that was historic in proportions, racial happenings and racial tension and explosions of racial tension in our communities, and a profound crisis of our democracy. It wasn't a coincidence. None of this was a coincidence. Rather, all of these crises were additive so that each crisis built the intensity of each of the others. With every single institution of our communities, our nation, our economy, our families, our workplaces in upheaval simultaneously, change is inevitable, change is necessary, and disruption in all aspects of our lives was the name of the game. Things feel a little bit as we in the United States are beginning to reach some vaccine, some vaccinations are coming to our communities, and life is in some ways, we are beginning to come out of our pandemic seclusion. We are just collectively emerging slowly to look around, take inventory. We are not back to normal. There is no normal to go back to at this point, but we're inventorying our impacts, and we have to begin thinking about how we rebuild, how and where we are rebuilding our communities. Tonight, we want to focus on what's been going on in workplaces for Washington workers, the experience of workers and their responses, the organizing and advocacy and policy work, and some attempt to kind of pull together the strands of history as we know them, what there is to learn from what the people who came before us and what we will be giving to the people who come after us. So I think I want to start by simply asking my fellow panelists to introduce yourselves. Please let us know your name, your work, your role in your organization if you have one, and a small description of yourself. And let us know what vantage point you held during the last year. And I'll start with that because history is in the eye of the beholder. The eyes I brought to this, I've been sitting behind my computer in my home on Queen Anne Hill and looking out on the world. I've been safe at home, fully employed, coping with isolation, but physical safety with my partner and my dog and an occasional family member on the back porch. So I think, Carmen, let us know who you are.
Hello, my name is Carmen Figueroa. I'm a mixed race woman, light skinned with dark shoulder length hair. I'm wearing a gray t-shirt or gray sweater, and my background is my wall. I am a partially disabled gig worker in Seattle and leader in the Pay Up campaign with Working Washington. Gig work is my only source of income. And without the safety nets offered to traditional workers, this last year I had no choice but to work more hours with less pay while extremely ill. I'm here to advocate today for set pay standards, including expenses, worker flexibility, and app transparency for all gig workers. We are not disposable, and I don't think we should be exploited.
Thank you, Carmen. April.
Yeah, I'm here because I've got Carmen's back. So I just want to say that. And good evening, everyone. I'm April Sims. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Black woman with light curly hair, wearing a white shirt and sitting in front of a really powerful painting of Angela Davis. I do want to, start by grounding myself and acknowledging that I am joining you from the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, the first people of Tacoma, the Puyallup tribe. And so I want to express my honor and gratitude to them for the privilege of living and working on their land. I also want to acknowledge that mine is a legacy of stolen people on stolen land. So I raise my voice in the fight for Black liberation and the movement for Black lives. And following Rachel's lead tonight, I would invite you all to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, and migration that bring us all into this space, and hope that you will consider uncovering these truths at all of your events moving forward as well. I've had the privilege of working as a leader in Washington's labor movement, advocating for the rights and the dignity of working people. And at the same time, grappling with leading as a woman of color, processing my own trauma in this moment in a time of huge need in an organization that has traditionally been led by white men. And at the same time, trying to balance the tension between having to react to the crisis that we're in and being proactive in building the vision for the world we want to see when we come out of this crisis. So thank you for allowing me to be on the panel tonight.
Thank you, April. Thank you, Carmen. I thought I would begin with some framing information about what work has been like for Washington workers in the pandemic. We at the Washington Labor Education and Research Center believe that all of our work starts and ends with the experience of workers. But one of the questions I had to grapple with this year is, what is it that we can do that is going to be most helpful to workers in this crisis? And one of the things we decided to do was bend our resources to doing some research that would give some definitive answers to who are the essential workers in our community and what do they need? What ways are they vulnerable, and what solutions are going to be most pinpointed to the needs of the moment? We started off by asking that question: who are the essential workers and what do they need? And we realized that the state of Washington and the federal government call an essential worker, let's see, lawyers are essential workers, accountants are essential workers, teachers are essential workers. Yes, work is essential. Everyone's work is essential. But what we realized we really wanted to get to was, who are the workers that are at work at risk of exposure to the virus and at risk of economic catastrophe? We started looking at, so we had to go through a lot of data mining. We have some extraordinarily talented people who did some sorting out of the statistics and the data. What we found was that the people that we considered highly at risk for exposure to the virus and highly at risk for economic catastrophe amounted to about 900,000 Washington workers. That's about a quarter of all Washington workers. 1/4 of our state workers were at risk. This is by virtue of the occupations. They work close together, they work public facing with the public, they have less controlled HVAC systems around them. Then we started thinking about, well, who are the people doing this work? Who are these 900,000 people? 2/3 of the highly at risk, low wage, high risk workers, 2/3 are women. They are disproportionately workers of color. I don't think I was surprised to hear that, but I was surprised at the strength of the data, the unequivocal support for what workers knew, which is the people who are out on the front lines are women and people of color. And they were living at the margins before the crisis, and during a crisis, there was no margin left. We did some ongoing research. We looked at what was happening to them over the year. About 6 months later, we went back to that list of workers, and we found really that the pandemic was splitting into two pandemics. There was the people who were working, and they were in a pitched battle over safety issues. They were fighting for PPE. They were fighting for hazard pay. They were fighting for unemployment. They were fighting for the right to be paid to be paid when they were sent home because they were exposed and they were quarantined. They were fighting for the economic support and for the physical support necessary for people facing the disease. Those who were not working were at home, and they had gone from being at the margins of our economy to over the edge. We found huge numbers of people facing behind on rent, behind on mortgage, facing food insecurity, facing and potential bankruptcy, eviction, all the symptoms of bankruptcy and eviction. We decided we had to go even deeper into the data than that. And we stopped looking at that 900,000 people that we were terribly worried about. And we looked at Census Bureau data of the entire state, all workers, all families, all people. There are little snapshots that the Census Bureau took called the Pulse data. It's very, very rich data. We have a whole bunch of stuff on our website at the Labor Center, but here's some of the things that fell out of it. It was really profound to me. Unequivocally, this pandemic was different depending on your race, your class, and your gender. The data is rich and it is unequivocal. This is not just a feeling. What was the most important thing? For instance, we all know that women fell out of the workforce. Was it because they lost their jobs? What was it? The data is crystal clear. Women left the workforce because they were called upon to be mothers to children who were sent home from school, and they're caring for elders, and they're caring for family members in a health crisis, right? We found that men, and particularly Latinx men who were out of work because they've been exposed to disease. They were out of work because of the virus itself. And they faced really high mortality rates as well. There's all sorts of interesting stuff, but I want to come back to the key point here. We knew in our communities that this pandemic was hitting parts of our community very hard, parts of our community psychically perhaps, but not hard in the same nuts and bolts material ways. And I think the most important thing, coming back to the themes of tonight's meeting, the most important thing to think about is this pandemic fractured our workplaces and our work life along the same fault lines that are fracturing our communities: race, class, and gender. And everything has got to start from that awareness. I think for many of us, this year has been a time to understand that even more deeply and to probe those questions even more deeply. How has the fact of race, gender, and class wounded our country, wounded our communities, and built deep divisions? And yet, in this year, we've seen unity and unified action and unified response from our community, unlike any I've seen in my life. So I want tonight's conversation to explore these themes of the fracture lines and the ways that we are trying to organize ourselves in our workplaces to find unity and solutions. So that's kind of the frame that I bring to this, and I hope we can have a conversation along those lines. So I think let's start with Carmen. Carmen, I would love you to tell us a little bit more about your work as a gig worker. And what's this year been like for you?
This year has been surreal. Let's see. It's been surreal mostly because I'm sorry, I had like a whole speech prepared, but now you've asked me a question that's in the middle of the speech. It was just it was extremely difficult at times, just because as a gig worker, we rely on the orders that we receive. And with so many people turning to gig work, the orders got spread out. So we didn't get as many orders as I would normally get before the pandemic. So I ended up having to work many more hours to just get to where I was. And at the same time, I was extremely ill with flu-like symptoms. At the time, I didn't know, I still don't know if I had COVID or not. I suspect that I did, because I was extremely ill between sort of January and March. And COVID didn't really hit this area, and the lockdowns didn't really start happening until March. And that's when I kind of started to feel better. The surrealness came from, especially during the beginning in March when we had curfews. The curfews were, I don't think they were strictly enforced, but they were strictly followed. And so a lot of restaurants would close down about an hour before curfew so their workers could get home. But I would stay out, logged on, just trying to get every last order I could. And after curfew, there was nobody on the streets. All the storefronts were dark. It was quiet, dark. And I would get on the freeway to come home, and I would be the only one on the freeway in both directions. So sometimes it was just like post-apocalyptic. I just didn't know how the world was going to move forward.
And your workplace, in many ways, is your car.
Yes.
So unlike the other essential workers, you know, we put up signs saying support our essential workers. Did you feel honored and included when you would see support our essential workers? Did you feel honored and included as an essential worker?
Not really, because as a gig worker, you're not really recognized as, well, I felt that I was not really recognized as essential until your food was delivered. Then I was essential. But before that, like, nobody knew we were there.
And how about your relationships with other workers in either in in Grubhub? Grubhub is your primary
Yeah.
relationship. How's your relationship with other Grubhub workers changed or developed in this time?
Changed. So I don't really have coworkers in a traditional sense. Like we don't meet in the break room or anything like that. I meet up with people just sort of hanging out outside of restaurants. We might talk amongst ourselves, but don't really have much of a relationship with the other delivery drivers. Recognize them, say hi. If I see somebody who just seems wide-eyed and lost, I try to help them along and give them directions of where they need to go. Or if anyone asks me a question, I usually try to answer it, like, where do you park? Or how did you get here so quick? That sort of thing. But we don't really have coworkers in the traditional sense of a coworker. In the beginning of the pandemic, and when a lot of people got laid off and people came flocking sort of to gig work, I was kind of resentful that they were all there because they saturated the market and diluted the orders. So like I said before, we get paid by the order. And I can go over how we get paid, but we get paid by the order. So if there are so many people out there and so many orders, it just gets diluted. I don't know if I explained that correctly. So you have to get more and more orders to just kind of come out where you were. There was a lot of times where I would just make enough to go on for the next day. So just making about $40, and I worked about 6 hours. At that same time also though, the restaurants, they were working with skeleton crews, so there was long wait times. You'd end up waiting about anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour for an order, and then you'd go deliver the order, and then you'd wait for your next order. So because of all of that whole scenario, having to wait for long wait times and more drivers taking up more orders, at first I was really resentful, but now I just realized that, you know, everyone's just trying to earn an income. So I got over myself and I'm no longer resentful to those other drivers that that came in. And now things are starting to even out. Some of the drivers who came in, they're going back to their old jobs. So the market isn't as saturated as it was, but it's starting to get better. And I think people are also appreciating us a little bit more. They realize the essential link that we are from the restaurant to you, and tipping a lot more, and tip your drivers. All the fees that you're charged for delivery does not go to the driver. The delivery fee, I use my phone to order fee, like all the fees that you're charged, none of that goes to the driver. I can explain how we get paid if you want me to.
what I would like to do is ask April to also introduce herself a little bit, and then let's get into some conversation about who's doing the work and how are they reacting to the stresses of this time, and where do we go with that, right? Okay. Let's bring April into the conversation, then develop a conversation a tad. So are you ready to go, April, or you want me to ask you a question?
I mean, I've been ready to go since Carmen started talking. I want to interject and be like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But that's why workers need a union. But you should ask me the question you wanted to ask me, and then we could take it from there.
Okay. I think this question of division and unity is the crux question of our time, for at least for me and you and people like us. The divisions are so deep, and the need for unity is like never in my lifetime. You are in a position of leadership, and I have thought of you often while we haven't been seeing each other this year, thinking about what an incredibly difficult seat you've been sitting in this year, balancing your life as a Black woman, your life as a labor leader, our need to take action, and the unknowable demands of leadership. So I'm interested in hearing you talk a little bit about that chaos that you've been trying to lead in.
Yeah, it does feel like a year of, this last year has been a lot. I'll just say that. And I know that all the folks listening tonight will agree with, kind of the things that we were unprepared for and the ways in which life has changed. But I think, we've seen a lot of, amidst all the chaos, there has been a lot of unity. I think about the last year and all of the working people coming together to support one another in these hard times, whether it was fighting for PPE support for our medical staff, getting funds to laid off workers through our Foundation for Working Families, the targeted drives that Unite here did, PPP drives for farm workers. Working people were there to support each other while the government was scrambling. We just mobilized. And that highlights that the labor movement was born for moments like these. And I think that's an important reminder when we are facing times of crisis or chaos, is to remember that our movement was born out of working people coming together to support each other, right? And to demand more safety and protection and a voice on the job, and the dignity that workers like Carmen are fighting for right now. So I think in a lot of ways, the crisis felt familiar in that it put a squeeze on workers, right? And that it highlighted that the narrative is wrong. The narrative that if you just work hard and you play by the rules, then you'll be okay. That narrative is wrong, because we know that the rules weren't written for like working class folks, right? Working people know that the deck is already stacked against us, and we feel those impacts first. And so in some ways it was really familiar. In other ways, different, because I think for the first time in decades, more and more people were recognizing what those of us in the labor movement have always known, and that's that working people are essential, that we're the backbone of our society, and that we deserve fair compensation and respect for the critical role we play. I mean, union approval is at the highest it's been in decades. And at the same time, public opinion of billionaires is at an all-time low. It's been a bad year for billionaire PR, and there's a seismic shift afoot in working America. Workers more and more are realizing that they have to come together in union if they want to have a voice in the workplace. So I think lots of familiarity, and at the same time, working in a landscape that has been really different, working without a guidebook, right? And dealing with this ongoing narrative of scarcity, that there isn't enough. But the reality is there's never been enough for the working class, because the wealthy elite have always hoarded it. There's plenty to go around if we come up with systems and policies to share it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but just thinking about unity and what's different and what's the same. It's a time of deep challenge, but the challenges aren't that different than they've always been.
Yes. And, right before the pandemic, I did a labor history, a little bit of, 2-hour labor history for some people in pre-apprenticeship work. And literally it was the day before the shutdown. And I decided to really focus on the fact that in the times of greatest trauma to working people came the greatest upheaval and came the greatest gains for working people. That our policy gains and the real changes we've made in our economy have come in waves, a couple different waves in American history. And the most recent one being in the 60s and 70s, right? Following a period of global upheaval. And I hope that this period is ushering in another economic upheaval and ratcheting forward of our standards. But I want to ask you, how has your personal leadership been challenged in the great unknown? You were kind of new in your job when this pandemic hit, right?
Yeah. I'd only been in my elected position for about a year, just over a year. Like, how has my leadership changed? I think I am recognizing that the dominant culture has always suggested to us that leadership show up in one very specific way, right? That it is really about strong elbows and not so much about soft power, or that it's about decisive decision-making and not so much about creative collaboration, and that leaders are supposed to have all the right answers instead of asking all the right questions. And so I've really been leaning into asking the right questions, or trying to ask the right questions, and trying to disrupt the narrative that the dominant culture tells us a leader is. I've been focusing on healing and vulnerability. I think I've been forced to be a little bit vulnerable in this last year. George Floyd's murder was traumatic, not just for me, but for my family and my community. And having to process that trauma in a very public way, or as a public leader, really forced me. I could say it forced me, but I guess also it gave me the opportunity to lean into my vulnerability and be authentic, and use that as an opportunity to disrupt what we currently think of as leaders, and the attributes that we currently assign to who is a good leader. And I hope that in turn creates pathways for new leadership models, new leadership types, and new leaders, period, in our movement, to show that there are a number of different ways that we can do this, and all of the approaches are worthwhile.
It's been amazing to watch you winging it, flying, not winging it, flying forward.
No, winging it is right, Adair. I think you had it right.
Flying forward in this moment. Oh my God, remember last fall? Oh my God, it's been a year.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this question of division and unity. How workers have come together to self-advocate, collectively advocate for themselves. Carmen, I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that, and then April, talk a little bit more about what we're seeing around in the community. Bridging the divisions in our community to make change.
So for me to advocate, I mostly have to advocate for myself. Trying to get unemployment insurance and other things, I really had to struggle through it. And I think at times that those processes are purposely made confusing. I'm not sure why. And without being able to get any help, or like just calling unemployment every single day, calling my senators, calling my representatives, writing letters, just trying to get what I felt I needed for myself to be able to survive, was extremely difficult, just to have to do it all by myself. So I've always have to advocate for me. I would share with the Pay Up campaign when I did discover things that worked. And I'm not sure how that got sort of spread out through to people who needed that information. But yeah, as a gig worker, especially as a delivery driver, there isn't much unity because we're all kind of individuals and like we're in our own cars. And so we're all going different directions kind of at the same time. So there isn't a lot of unity until we come to forums like this. Yeah.
Somehow that feels like a great segue to you, April.
You know, I was thinking about what Carmen said earlier, specifically around, you know, kind of the frustration that she felt when so many other folks started, you know, becoming delivery drivers, right? And how it diluted the work that she was able to get, right? And I think that is and then the realization that actually, you know, these folks are just trying to get by, just like I'm trying to get by. Because we've all been sold a hustle, right? Like that this scarcity mentality, right, is a tool of capital, and it will have us believe that there isn't enough to go around, right? So then we're looking at each other, you know, we're looking at each other and all fighting over the same crumbs because the billionaire bosses are keeping all the riches for themselves. And so I think that it is the scarcity mentality that creates division. And it's conversations like this that lead to unity, right? When we come together and we realize that actually there's enough for all of us, we just have to work together to make sure that we get it. Because when I hear stories of Carmen saying that I'm working more and I'm making less, you know, that she's working for 6 hours and making $40, and that doesn't calculate or take into account all of her own expenses, the wear and tear on her vehicle, her gas, her own phone. And at the same time, I know that these app-based companies are making profits, record profits, right? And they're intentionally dividing us and trying to sow division within our ranks. And it's conversations like this that lead to unity. And so Carmen, I just want to let you know that the labor movement is behind you on this. Like, we got your back. All the things that Adair was just talking about in her data and her research, all that is summed up in what you've said tonight, that you are working more and you are making less. And that's a travesty. And it's got me all fired up now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I just feel these app-based companies, on average, they pay us about $3 an order, about on average. So without tips or mileage or pandemic pay, that would just be $3 an hour. Or $3 an order. And at that particular time, if you're only getting one order an hour, you're making $3 an hour. Yeah. I do feel like all the fees that people are charged, the shareholders and the executives that have that own the apps, they are experiencing a profit boom, a profit bonanza, and none of that is trickling down to any of the workers. We're still getting on average about $3 an order. I feel with all the money that they are making off of us, because they don't really have a business without us. All the money that they are making off of us, they could pay us more. I'm not trying to take away their riches or anything like that. I'm just saying that you can't take it all with you. You could pay us more.
Absolutely. And we in the community, you know, we made our stabs. I mean, I'm a consumer. I was grateful. I supported some policy things in Olympia and at the city level that were supposed to be going to help you all. I think you told me last week that extra pandemic pay and the stuff that was coming through political pressure and some legislation didn't really boost your pay in the end too much, right? It drew in
No.
more workers. It drew more workers into Seattle.
Yes.
So April, our community, our state, we accomplished some things at the state policy level and at the federal level on behalf of some newly visible essential workers, including gig workers, including farm workers, right? This pandemic unmasked a lot of the awful conditions that a lot of workers in our community were working in. And can you talk a little bit about some of the breakthroughs in public policy that the crisis has allowed us to get another toehold?
Yeah, it's been an incredible year, really, when you think about some of the policies that we've been able to fight for in coalition with community partners and other organizations. I mean, the unemployment fund for undocumented folks in Washington state, nearly $600 million in total funding. Our undocumented immigrants pay taxes just like the rest of us. And with this fund, they were finally able to access at least some relief because they'd been left out of the traditional economic relief levers that were available for other workers in Washington state. We have to do more. This is just the start, but that was historic, right? Being able to free up money for the first time for unemployment funds for undocumented workers. What we've done around police reform, right? Police reform is a working people's issue. It's especially important in this moment as we start to open up and seek economic recovery, thinking about the impact to workers and how economic justice and racial justice go hand in hand. So we were able to work with community and help pass a series of bills to increase police accountability in Washington state, from banning chokeholds and firing into vehicles to creating legislation that would mandate reporting of use of force incidents to a statewide authority so that we could track that data. Overtime workers, or overtime for farm workers, which is historic. It's overturning a Jim Crow era exemption for our farm workers. Washington is the first state in the nation to require that all farm workers be paid overtime. This is followed closely by California. They've got a slightly longer phase in than we do here in Washington, but even fighting for access to unemployment benefits for app-based and gig work or gig-based workers and folks that filed 1099s during the pandemic, moratoriums on evictions, and fighting to make sure that folks didn't have their utilities cut off during the pandemic. Those are some of the policies that we were able to pass as a result of the moment that we were in. And I think the challenge for those of us in leadership positions now is to figure out how do we institutionalize those short-term gains so that we are prepared for the next potential pandemic, which could be a climate crisis, it could be fires. I mean, there are any number of things where we need to have a robust social safety net. And so how are we taking the learnings from the moment that we're in and the policy gains that we made in the short term and institutionalizing those so that we have some long-term gain from all of the pain that we've suffered over the last year?
I agree. I think that a lot of the gains that were made recently, they need to be permanent, and that's why I'm trying to advocate to have some of these standards be set by the industries, just so we're not so exploited.
Yeah.
If we had more of a set pay scale without losing the flexibility that I have, because right now flexibility is very, very important to me. Because of my back injury, I'm not really sure like what my pain level is going to be for that day. And so if I can only work 2 hours, then that's all I can work. So flexibility is very important to me. And gig work is the only industry that allows that sort of flexibility. And it's the only way that I can earn an income at this time. So I would just like more standards, and them to be, I think the word you used was institutionalized for everyone, not just for Grubhub delivery drivers, but for all delivery drivers. We have a set standard, and so we know what we can fall back on.
Yeah.
I say all the time, like when I'm reaching for a safety net, it's because I'm falling, not because I'm lazy and don't want to work. It's because I'm falling and I need that safety net.
Yeah, and I think that you deserve both, right? You deserve to have a flexible schedule, the schedule that you need and the schedule that works for you, and the dignity that comes from working hard and making enough money to take care of yourself and take care of your family. And you shouldn't have to sacrifice one for the other, because you're making billions of dollars for these app-based companies. So,
right. Yeah, if they have enough if they have enough for themselves and for their families, and then with a very comfortable padding, they could share a little bit more. It doesn't all have to go to shareholders. It doesn't all have to go to offshore accounts where you're hiding it. Like, just share the wealth.
Yeah, because you're taking the risk, right? It's your car, it's your phone. You're using all of your resources to do this job, and they're getting all the profits.
Yes.
And
They
you
came
weren't
up with the idea, and they created the app, and they're running the app, but they're not really doing anything now except just collecting the profit.
Mhm. I was thinking about, as you, Carmen, as you have been beginning to work with your other coworkers at Grubhub and other app-based workers, and April, as you work with a really broad swath of workers, you've been out front, here, there, and everywhere. I would love to hear you bring forth some more stories you've heard from other workers, some more messages and lessons you might have heard. I mean, Carmen, tell me more about the kinds of other workers that you talk to when you're standing in line outside a restaurant, waiting for your order to be ready, and talking about, this kind of isn't okay. This is not right, what's going on here. What stories are you hearing from other people?
A lot of the stories that I hear from other people are just more of what I've been trying to convey tonight, about just long wait times, people coming in from other areas, gobbling up our profits. And because we don't really have sort of the traditional coworker mentality, I think there isn't a lot of, I guess, coworkerness that people are thinking of when you say the word coworker. Like I said, I have people that I see more often than I see others. There's cars that I recognize. There's people who recognize my car, know sometimes that I'll let them cut in into traffic and that sort of thing. So there is some camaraderie. But if we're not just sort of chit-chatting outside of a restaurant, there isn't a lot of camaraderie. Yeah.
It's the challenges of bringing unity out of disunity are specific in your industry. For April, it's a more global question. How do we bring unity out of disunity so that we can move forward? What are, reflect, April.
Well, I was just thinking, I think it starts with sharing the stories, right? There is the data that you all have pulled together and that you've shared with us tonight, and the full reports that you've done. But then I think there are the real stories of how that data impacts families, right? Like I think about my friend Lisa, who is a grocery store clerk, right? She's got 3 small kids. Her mom lives with her and provides her childcare. At the height of COVID, she was working every shift she could because she saw that as an opportunity to make as much money as possible for her family. And she knew that she was, risking her health, risking her mom's health, but her whole family counted on her paycheck. So she was just doing what she had to do. I think about my friend Stephanie, who's a nurse, right? She's a single mom. She's got a 3-year-old son. So she has childcare, but during the height of COVID, she would go to work, pick him up from work, terrified that she might expose somebody, that she might be exposed to the virus and therefore expose somebody else in her life to the virus. So she had pretty much cut herself off from her social safety net, right? And the folks that would provide her with additional support because she's got this, really hyperactive 3-year-old boy. But that was because she loved her job as a nurse, needed her job as a nurse, but knew she was risking her health and didn't want to risk anybody else because of COVID. So we have to start centering the experiences of the workers who are directly impacted in this moment, and making sure that any policy conversation, any advances that we want to make are centered around what those workers need. Workers like Carmen, workers like Stephanie, and workers like Lisa, who are paying the real cost of the moment that we're in. And I think that's how we build unity out of disunity, is by centering the stories of the workers who are impacted in this moment. So I'm bringing Stephanie and Lisa into this conversation with me tonight to join you, Carmen, and you, Adair.
I'd like to bring my goddaughter into this conversation, who's got a 10-year-old. She just delivered a new baby 48 hours ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Her mother's been quite sick, very, going through chemo and extremely at risk, extraordinarily at risk. And so she was juggling parenting, pregnancy, a new marriage, and a very sick mother with incredible grace. But I think that I spent a life organizing around childcare issues. I don't think I ever really internalized how critical our childcare crisis is until this year. There's some level of understanding what mothers were going through, or not understanding, looking at mothers doing everything they had to do to survive and care for their children and hold down jobs and care for their elders. It was a profound awakening to me, and I thought I knew a lot about working women.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's the reality of those stories. And so I think the next, big policy piece that I think is on the horizon that we're really starting to think about in the labor movement, and that I know our community partners are thinking about, is childcare. But I think what we have to do is make sure that as we're thinking about childcare, we're centering those stories, right? We're centering those experiences, that we know that the folks closest to the problem are the ones closest to the solution, and we're giving space for their voice in how we want to solve these problems, and not assuming that we know because at one point in time I had small kids, right? That we're taking our lead from them, and that we're taking our lead from workers like Carmen.
Yeah, it was obvious going through some of the process of like trying to apply for help, and through the different charity organizations and through unemployment, and that they had no idea how gig workers worked, how we got paid, and what we truly needed to be able to survive the pandemic. So if we could make policies around what we actually need, And to do that, you have to understand how we work. And it would just be nice to be, well, not nice, but mandatory to be included in some of these conversations. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I chose to speak today. Yeah.
That's awesome. There is actually a question in the chat, in the question area, saying, Carmen, tell us the best way to tip our Grubhub drivers. You've given us all an education about how important it is to tip correctly in the right way. Tell us exactly what is the best way to support drivers.
The best way is either as a cash tip, which means you have to answer your door, or through the app. There is an area, I know through Grubhub, whatever the customer leaves as a tip is given 100% to the driver. I'm not sure if other apps are the same. I've heard crazy stories, but I'm not, I know for sure that Grubhub, if you give somebody a tip, whatever you give them, 100% of that goes to the driver. I have had people tape envelopes to their door with cash in it. So that's a way, if you don't want to leave it on the app and you don't want to answer the door, that's another way to make sure that your driver gets a tip. Cash tips are always nice. But I guess the best way, well, before we used to be able to see what the tip was before we accepted the offer, but they took that option away, so we don't know. And I know that one of the reasons they kind of took it away is because if you left a 0 tip, some people wouldn't take your order. So they took that option away, and so we don't know who tips now until the compensation for that order appears in our earnings screens, and that happens 15 minutes after we've completed the order.
So you know about a cash tip right away. You don't know about an electronic tip for a while.
Yeah, until 15 minutes after the order is completed.
That must be emotionally a little complicated because you don't know if you just got stiffed. Right?
Well, you still get the total of the order. So if the order is valued at $3, and then you get the $2.50 pandemic pay, and then you get the mileage, which is usually $1 or $2. So, and then the person tips $5, that could really boost that particular order from a $3 order to like a $12 order.
And if you're doing an order an hour, it sounds like if you're lucky, you get about $12. Depending.
Yeah, but like I said, things are starting to get a little bit better. And also people are appreciating the link that we provide from restaurant to you, and tipping us more. And I think some of like these types of forums and campaigns get the word out there that most of my profit comes from a tip.
And what type of support can the audience give to you and your coworkers collectively? What's the support that's going to help change your industry? The name of your organizing project is, again, for the crowd,
the Pay Up campaign, and with Working Washington. So what would support us the most, I think, is just pushing legislation that would allow us to be able to access some of the benefits for more traditional workers. We've gotten some of that from this pandemic, like the ability to now accrue sick pay and the pandemic pay, but that's only within the Seattle city limits. So if you're delivering outside of the Seattle city limits, you don't have access to those things. So I would like legislation to be passed for some of the safety nets that traditional workers have be extended to us also. So that's one way that you can support your delivery drivers and other gig workers. And I can't remember what else.
Oh, that's okay. And then we have in the chat for people who are watching the link to Pay Up campaign, and it gives other ways to sign up to be supportive. I want to turn a little bit to thinking about the future. We are not really, I mean, it's so funny, this sense of, I guess springtime came and I got a shot in the arm and I suddenly felt like maybe the light at the end of the tunnel, and yet not. You know, it's like there's that funny feeling that maybe we're about to come out of this. We're not. There's so much that we learned last year that I can't unlearn about race, about our economy, about wealth, and the threats to our democracy. So there are days when I feel like the sun is about to come out, and there are days when I realize we got a long slog still ahead here. I want to talk about what dreams do you have for the so-called recovery? The equitable recovery, some people call it, the Build Back Better, some people call it. Where are we going? What's our dreams, and how are we going to get there?
For me, I have just been struggling for so long, even before the pandemic, to just get by, that the future seems so big and far away. I don't know how I could possibly plan for the future when I'm just trying to get through today.
What is a future that you would like us all to be pulling towards? Again, this question, what can we unify? What can we bring ourselves together around?
Let's see. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm sorry.
I'm going to hear from April, and maybe you can react to something April has to say.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Carmen, I think that that's real. You know, I think in terms of the future, what I'm hoping for is that we as a movement get real serious about addressing systemic and institutional racism. I think if we want to be relevant in the future, we have to take a hard look at our institutions that have been built on a system of racism, accept that they're inherently racist, and do the difficult work of becoming actively anti-racist, so that we can create real space for all of the folks in our labor movement. You know, right now we're working hard to pass the PRO Act. When the PRO Act passes, there are 60 million workers that say they would join a union tomorrow if given the opportunity. And I think the only way our unions make sure that we are ready for that opportunity and that moment is if we get serious about the equity work that we need to do. So what gives me hope, you know, on the sunniest days is the conversations that we are having and the space that we're creating for dialogue and a deeper understanding around how systemic and institutional racism hurts all workers, whether you are Black, brown, Indigenous, or white. That we are all suffering under this capitalist system that is built on a system of racism.
Mm-hmm. Hear, 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 hear. Anything to add to that, Carmen? How do we learn to take better care of each other? People, you said that you've been experimenting with some leadership in a time of trauma and healing. And what are you learning about taking better care of each other?
You know, I think what I'm learning is someone has to talk about it, right? That when it comes to trauma and healing and pain and depression and isolation, that like somebody has to talk about it. And we have to be okay we have to acknowledge it, that it's a thing, that we are experiencing pain or hurting. You know, I'm thinking about this conversation that we had, you know, like a regular staff check-in, right? All the staff are on the call. And, you know, finally I just said, you know, I just want to lift up that, you know, like folks should be taking their vacation. They should be taking their sick leave, that, you know, we have insurance available to everyone on the team. So if you need someone to talk to, like somebody has to break the ice and just say that this is a thing, and be okay with it being a thing. This idea that we all know that somebody somehow has the answers when none of us have ever survived a pandemic or a moment like this is, you know, part of what the dominant culture tells us leaders are supposed to do is just fake it until we make it. And I think I am trying to be really vulnerable and transparent about what I'm learning, and where I need help, and breaking the ice so that the folks around me feel like they can say that too. So that it's okay to say, I don't know, or it's okay to say that I'm struggling. And that also has been helpful for me in thinking about my own healing. I had COVID this year. My whole family had COVID. And so for the first time, I've always had the privilege of being really healthy. And so for the first time in my life, I felt myself like having to ask for help. Actually taking 2 full weeks off work and completely disconnecting from my responsibilities and learning to be okay with that and count on my team. So I've been thinking a lot about healing and what it means to be vulnerable and heal at the same time. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I'm sorry to folks who are listening tonight at me kind of process out loud all of my emotions in this moment. But I think really it's, you know, we've got to stop pretending that we have all the answers, and start asking all the questions and creating space for folks to ask all the questions. That's how we heal.
Mhm. What gives you most hope, both of you? What gives you most hope moving forward?
This forum gives me hope, that people care enough to be able to come together to talk about it. Yeah.
Yes. Moments like this, I agree, Carmen. This is a lot of what gives me hope. Just forums and spaces like this, and young people. You know, like I've watched young people with amazement this last year. They are bold, impatient with the slow pace of change. And every time I hear someone say these young people are so entitled, I just think, yes, yes. What are we doing if not, you know, for the next generation to feel like they're entitled to have it better than we did, right? Like, so I say, bring on all the entitlement, bring on all the young people who are like, the system is not working for us and we want a new system. All the young people who say, I'm not going back to normal because that wasn't normal, the status quo didn't work for me. I want all that energy. That brings me so much hope.
Hear, hear. And you, Carmen, what gives you the most hope? Oh, you answered. We all do it. I feel the same way. It's a delight to be able to talk through all this stuff. I'm wondering if anyone from the audience has some more last questions for the panel. Anything? Let's have a shout out from the audience. Come on. Do you guys have anything that you want to ask each other? Have you had a chance to? Carmen, you have any questions for April?
I don't have questions. I just have, I think people's attitude towards work is starting to change, especially coming out of this pandemic. People aren't so willing to work unpaid overtime or drop everything just to satisfy a deadline or to satisfy a need for the company they work for. I think a lot of people are not going to show up if they ask for a day off to go to a wedding or a football game and their employer says no, or they're not going to show up that day. And I just think the attitude of how companies treat their employees, like I feel like sometimes companies sort of expect their employees that they are going to drop everything in their personal life to satisfy whatever need the company has. And in exchange for that, you get a paycheck and maybe some benefits. And I just think the attitude for most people coming out of this pandemic, that sort of mentality for the employees, for the workers, are going to start changing. And I hope that the companies change their attitude too. Yeah.
I've had the privilege of working in an institution that is just well, it's an institution run by working mothers. So they've constantly reminded us, take care of yourself, take care of your children. And if that means you can't make another Zoom call, just skip it. I mean, and I get that from the top, which is really meaningful to me. And I read some newspaper article, this, some woman saying, this is the craziest year of my life. Everything has gone crazy. And why is it that the one thing that I've gotten up and done every day is go to work? What is wrong with that picture? And I think so many of us are waking up to the fact that I have family and friends I have not given a hug to in a year, and I'm not going to pass up chances to go give a hug and to go to a wedding, to go to a birth, and to go care for a sick friend. I'm going to figure out how to do it. And I hope that that awareness stays with me for a long time. That work is important, but it is not as important as the things I couldn't do this year. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the opportunity of the moment that we're in, right? This recognition that the status quo wasn't working, and an opportunity to reshape what work looks like. Like what does it look like coming out of this pandemic? And I think for us in the labor movement, it is not allowing the narrative to be driven by business. Like right now, everyone is talking about, well, when is Microsoft and Amazon going back to work? And right now that's driving the narrative, and we have an opportunity to help shape the narrative and center workers in how we want to reshape work. And we will never have an opportunity like this again,
right?
To push back on the status quo. So I'm with you on that, Carmen, that workers are demanding better from their employer. And it is the job and the work of the labor movement to mobilize workers so that we can get it. And I'm with you, Adair. This year has opened my eyes to the need for more balance and more healing in my life, personally and professionally. So.
Yeah. And how we are going to do that together, and how we're going to insist on those changes together. I don't know. Is there any? Oh, any more questions? What?
Well, if we have time, I had a question for Carmen. Thinking about your campaign and the work that you were doing with Working Washington and the organizing that you've been doing, what can the labor movement do to support you? What are you looking for from the labor movement, which is, where I might be able to be helpful or mobilize some folks to help?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know. I would have to ask my leaders what you can do. Hopefully I can forward your information onto them.
Absolutely, you can forward my information onto them, but you can also call me.
Okay.
And we can have a conversation after this panel, because I meant what I said. I'm moved and compelled by what you've shared, your vulnerability and your bravery to come, to this panel tonight and share your experience, and want to know what ways I can help lift up your leadership in the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. That gives me hope.
That's terrific.
Good. That gives me hope too, just this conversation and this connection. So.
Oh, welcome back, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciated hearing from both of you, April and Carmen and Adair. I have so much to think about. So thank you. And for all of you on this call, thank you so much for joining us. I just feel like it's been a year, but there hasn't been enough time to really process what's happened. And so I feel hopeful too that we can have forums like this to try to work through how do we move forward and how do we make sense of it. I really appreciated what you were saying, April, too, about how we need to be vulnerable about the human aspect of needing time for the grief, needing time for the joy of getting to reconnect. So there's so much here. So thank you all. And this will be recorded, so we're excited. This actually is going to go in our archives. So hopefully, as people are trying to make sense of what happened during the pandemic, this will be a historic record of what did it mean to be workers and how can we learn. Connor, do you want to add anything?
I just got really excited that you were talking about archiving it.
Yes. And thank you so much to Connor and to the Labor Archives of Washington for all of your work to help us put this together.
It's seriously always a pleasure. Thank you all.
I want to thank you both for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and just give a shout out to Adair for facilitating the conversation. All these thought-provoking questions, Adair, thank you so much. I have deep gratitude for you and your work.
Thank you. You have me nearly in tears, both of you. I just need you to know that's just me. It's very moving to be with you tonight, so thank you.
I agree. For all of you on the call, I just wanted to say too that we're putting a link in the chat to a survey. We would love your thoughts as we continue to think through what kind of programming you find relevant and exciting and interesting. Please give us some thoughts so that we can keep having forums like this. And I did want to invite you to our next forum, which is also about workers, albeit more of a historical nature. It's going to be the Denny Lecture on June 8th at 7 p.m. and looking at the unwanted but indispensable Mexican railroad workers of World War II. So please join us for that with Dr. Erasmo Gamboa. It's going to be a great talk. And details will be in the chat and on our website. And also always ask if you learned something new or enjoy the work we do. We would love if you would consider making a gift or becoming a member to help support future programs and help us sustain us in the museum beyond the impact of the closure. We're very excited to be open again too. And we hope to see you at the museum. And we hope to have more programs like this in person sometime soon. And until then, continue to see you on Zoom. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate getting a chance to learn from you all and have you as our audience, and hope you stay healthy and safe and have a lovely evening.
Night. Thank you.
Night. Thank you.
Night. Thank you. Be safe, everyone.
Bye.